Hello. Today we're going to be talking about graphing again, specifically the multiplicity of your graphs. So for this first one, we're going to draw a rough sketch of just this first one with 3 different zeros. The zeros are going to be at x equals 3, -1, and +1 based off of your factors. Since there are 3 different factors, you're going to have a degree of 3. And so what we can do is we can just draw a real quick rough sketch. So one of our zeros is going to be over here at 3. We're going to have a 0 at 1, and we're going to have a 0 at -1. Now, because it's a degree of 3, and your leading coefficient on all of these is positive, you're going to start low and end high for your graph. If you wanted to, you could find your y-intercept to make it a little bit more realistic by multiplying all of your constants like this, a y value up here of 3. So your rough sketch would look something like this. Now, for this next one, it looks almost identical. You know your zeros are going to be 3, -1, and 1 once again. So you know it's going to have these as your y-intercept. But your degree is different because this factor happens twice. This next factor happens twice. And this third factor happens twice. So what happens is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different x's. So our graph, because it's a degree of 6, is supposed to look like this on the ends. So we need to figure out how we can actually graph this, but make it go up on both sides. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and we are going to look at our graphing calculator. So you can use Desmos, you can type this in on your graphing calculator, however you want to do that. Your first one, you can see this was our original graph, so we did a good job on that one. Now let's look at the new graph. So we have all of the factors here, but we have them twice. Notice what happens to our graph at each of these points. Notice it bounces off those points. It touches those and then keeps going back up. So your graph is going to look something like this, just with our rough sketch. So that is very odd because we have the same factors, different number of times, and different things are happening to the graphs. So looking at those, you can see things are happening at our x-intercepts based off of their multiplicity or the number of times that they occur. So I'm going to kind of compare these two. Again, same x-intercepts, different things are happening. And I'm going to look at my red graph and I'm going to change my degree here. Let's say that the graph or the x-intercept of 3 happens 3 times. Notice what's happening over here then at 3, 0. This graph is going through the graph at 3, 0. But what happens if I then change this to 4? Notice it looks slightly different, but at 3, 0 here, now instead of going through, it's going to bounce off. So let's make these all odd numbers up here, 3 and 5. And let's leave this one as a positive, actually, as an even number. It's a degree of 2. It's hard to see because it's over off to the side here, but it does have a degree of 2. So at 3, this graph is going through. At -1, this graph is going through. And at +1, this graph is bouncing off. So what's happening here is the number of times the root occurs is going to change the way the graph looks. If something is repeated an odd number of times, so if this number up here is odd, you have an odd multiplicity, and the graph is going to cross the x-axis at whatever that number is, meaning it's going to go from above to below or vice versa. Whereas if you have an even multiplicity and something occurs an even number of times, meaning this degree up here is an even number, the graph is going to bounce, is what we call, or in other words, touch but not cross. So we can think of this as like x minus 1 squared. Imagine graphing that parabola. We're used to seeing the vertex at 1, 0, and it's going to open up. It's a perfect visualization of the graph bouncing, but never actually crossing. So let's take a look at each of these. So our first root, x equals 3, is going to occur 2 times based off of the degree. Since your degree is an even number, it is going to bounce. The next one, -1, is going to occur 5 times. So therefore, your graph is going to cross because it's an odd number. So think through the next two and go ahead and write down your answers for those. So x equals 2 happens 3 times, therefore we're going to cross. X equals -2 happens 4 times, so therefore our graph is going to bounce. So we're going to go ahead and give this a rough sketch then. First thing we need to know is the degree. So we are going to add together all of the number of x's that would occur in this if we multiplied them out. So we'd have 2 x's from the first, 5 from the second factor, 3 and 4 from the third and fourth factor respectively. So if we add together all of those, our degree of this polynomial is going to be 14. Because that's an even number, my graph is going to end the same direction on both ways, on both ends. Since we don't have any negative x's, making it a negative leading coefficient, it's going to go up on both the left and the right side. Then we can graph our 4 zeros from least to greatest. We have -2, -1, 2, and 3. All of these points would be x-intercepts on your graph. We know your graph is going to start on end going up on both sides. So now we just need to know if we're bouncing or crossing. So at -2, we said we were bouncing, which means our graph is going to come to -2 and then keep bouncing back up. -1 is going to cross based off of the odd multiplicity. At 2, our graph is also going to cross. And then at 3, our graph is going to bounce. Now, this is just a rough sketch because we have no idea how high and how low our maximums and minimums are going to be. So we're just looking at this as just the rough sketch. However, we could answer questions like where is f of x going to be greater than 0 and where is f of x going to be less than 0 based off of this sketch because we have enough information for that. So let's go ahead and try a couple more practice problems here. So to sketch number 2, we know our zeros are going to happen at x equals 2 and x equals -1. At 2, our degree is 2, so this is going to bounce. At -1, our degree is 1, so this is going to cross. So we have -1 and +2. We're supposed to bounce at 2 and cross at -1, but we need to figure out what the rest of the graph is going to look like. So the degree of this one is going to be 2 plus 1, making it 3. It has a positive leading coefficient, which means it's going to start low and end high. So we know off to the left, our graph is going to point down, and off to the right, our graph is going to point up. Since we want to cross at -1, we're going to go through, and then we're going to bounce at 2. So let's go ahead then and try that idea for these next couple. Okay, so our degree here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 x's. Our zeros are going to be at 0, 1, and -2. The multiplicity of 0, x happens twice for that one, once and once for the next two. Since this is 2, this is going to touch or bounce. Again, notice they're using a different word here. For the next 2, our multiplicity is an odd number, so it's going to cross. So the sign of the leading coefficient is negative. So since it's negative and the degree is an even number, our graph should point down on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and just start this rough sketch here. X equals 0, x equals 1, and x equals -2. off on the ends here, I know it's going to be pointing down. I am going to be at -2 crossing through the x-axis and going from below to up above. At 0, I'm going to bounce and I'm going to stay up above. And then at 1, I'm going to cross through and go back below. This would be a rough sketch of our graph. For the next one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 for our degree. Our leading coefficient would be positive, which means our graph should point up in both the left and the right. Your zeros happen at 0, -3/2, and +1. 0 happens once, -3/2 happens once, and 1 happens twice. So any odd multiplicity is going to cross, any even multiplicity is going to bounce. So I can go ahead and graph these then, knowing that on the left and the right, my graph is going to point up. At -3/2, I cross. At 0, I cross. And at 1, I bounce. So that's the gist of it. Go ahead and pause the video, try the next 2 problems, and then come back to the video to check your work. Okay, so for the bottom left one, my graph should start low and end high. It should bounce at -2 and cross at 1. For the next one, my graph should start high and end low because of the negative out in front. You cross at -2, bounce at -1, cross at both 0 and 2. And again, this isn't going to give you the exact points, but it'll give you a good picture of your graph so that you can answer various questions about your graph. So thank you very much for listening.